אנחנו נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי, שבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות. אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שלום.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
אנחנו נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי, שבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות. אני מצפה שיתקפו.
She was just talking about that at dinner last night, how it's like... Do you know, it's interesting, Alex said most of the people in that class are not Jewish, and these are all like totally brand new concepts to them.
So I'm going to have to go back and forth between the slideshow and Chrome. For some reason it didn't embed the videos, but I have it set up to be able to. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So just make sure that someone takes some pictures with their phone. Otherwise, and someone needs to do the lights.
Yep. I think you can just do the ones on the bottom. Okay. Definitely.
Awesome. Thank you for hosting, coordinating, doing everything.
Pleasure.
Thank you for my team for coming.
Yep. mics are working.
Okay. Boker Tov, Shavua Tov. Thank you for being here this morning with us for this very important presentation. We're very pleased to welcome Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger and Khalil Sayeg, who will be joining us in just a little bit. He's running a little bit late. But we want to go ahead and get started. I will just share that when I met Hanan, and he was with somebody else, Noor Awad last time, right? When we were at Har Shalom, with a group of rabbis. The first thing I did after I got back was pick up the itinerary for we have an upcoming Israel trip to make sure that Roots was on the itinerary. And fortunately enough, it was, because I think that this was, for me, one of the most important things that I've heard about going on in Israel, because we don't hear about it going on. Right? We can read about conflicts. That's always in the news. Right? We know about everything that is happening right now. But stories like Roots, Shorashim, Judar, do not always make it into the news. And these are the stories that I think are really important to tell. So Roots, Shorashim, Judar is an Palestinian-Israeli grassroots initiative for understanding, nonviolence, and transformation based in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, however you want to refer to it. It's a unique network of local Palestinians and Israelis who have come together to see each other as partners, both the need to make changes to end our conflict. Based on the mutual recognition of each other's national identity, connection to the land, they're challenging the assumptions communities hold about each other, building trust and creating a new discourse around the conflict in our respective societies. I'll introduce Rabbi Schlesinger, and then I'll ask him when Khalil arrives to introduce Khalil. Rabbi Schlesinger is an Orthodox rabbi and teacher, a passionate Zionist settler who has been profoundly transformed by his encounters with Palestinians and the Palestinian people over the last 10 years. Originally from New York, Rabbi Hanan immigrated to Israel on his own at the age of 20 and lived in Alon Shvut in Gush Etzion for almost 35 years. He grew up in the Reform Jewish movement, but already by high school, he had been delving more towards a more traditional observance of Judaism. And following his BA, he spent 10 years in advanced Jewish studies, primarily at Har Etzion College of Jewish Studies, and the MA program, the Department of Jewish Philosophy at Hebrew U. He has been involved with this work for a very long time. In early 2014, Ali Abu Awad and an Israeli partner, Shaul Judamin, together with Rav Hanan and other Israelis and Palestinians, founded Roots Shorashim Judar. Rav Hanan currently serves as its Director of International Relations. He's the founder of the American Friends of Roots, a multi-faith organization dedicated to supporting the work of the organization. He speaks frequently here in the US with one of his Palestinian partners about the amazing work that they're doing, and I want to turn it over now to Rav Hanan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our sponsors. I live in Judea and Samaria, and I also live in the West Bank, and I also live in the Palestinian territories. I also live in occupied territory and liberated territory and Greater Israel, but I just live in one place. And in that one place that I live, with all those different labels, there's lots of absurd situations. I want to point out one of them. Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs live in that same landmass, very, very close to each other, but totally far away, in different universes. We have different languages, cultures, and religions. We live in different villages and towns and cities, never in the same neighborhood. We have different health systems. We have different transportation systems and different educational systems. We live under different legal systems. I'm an Israeli citizen, and my Palestinian quote-unquote neighbors are citizens of no country, with no citizenship, with no legal rights. We also have different municipalities. We have different calendars. We also, and it's really interesting to say this today, we live in different time zones. How could that be? Because Israelis and Palestinians sometimes switch to and from daylight savings time on different days, or weeks, or months. So we have different times on our watches, but we live in the same landmass. That's really bad news. What does it mean? It's obvious. It means ignorance of the other side, and it means stereotypes and racism and bigotry, lots of misunderstandings, and resentment and fear. Where I come from, Israelis and Palestinians are so afraid of the other that it becomes part of our identity. It's not something external. You're not a normal Israeli, you're not a normal Palestinian if you're not afraid of the other side, if you don't know how dangerous they are. So that's all really bad, but it's worse. There's no common ground, but I don't mean there's a metaphor. I mean this. Ground. Because there's a big red sign put up by the Israeli army at the entrance to every single Palestinian village and town and city in the West Bank, and it says that Israelis, that means Jews, are not allowed in. And at the entrance to every single Israeli town and city and village and settlement in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, there's not a big red sign, but there is a guard in a guardhouse with a gun, and his job is only one thing, to keep out Palestinians. Palestinians cannot enter Israeli areas, residential areas, except if they are menial workers under armed guard with a work permit during work hours. So had there been a strange Israeli and a strange Palestinian that wanted to have a cup of coffee together, there is no place to do it. Almost no place to do it. And that was true until 9 years ago. 9 years ago, we created Merkaz Karama. Merkaz in Hebrew is center, Karama in Arabic is dignity, the dignity center. The dignity center is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian community center in the whole West Bank. The only one. It's the only shared space. It's the only place that the two sides can and do come together with a sense of safety and equality. No other place like it. When I say we created Merkaz Karama, I mean Roots, the Israeli-Palestinian Grassroots Initiative for Understanding Nonviolence and Transformation. So what happens in Merkaz Karama? Local Israelis and local Palestinians come for social activities and for educational activities, for learning about politics, religious activities, a lot of interfaith dialogue. The first goal is to humanize the enemy, to get over the demonization. And that's really hard, but it's only really hard. It's not really, really hard. The really, really, really hard part is the second level. After you've discovered a human being, and the truth is you're surprised that they're human, and then you're surprised that you're surprised, but you're still surprised. The next level is to come face to face with the national identity of the other side, and that national identity in most cases contradicts your identity. You hear that the way they understand you is different than the way you understand yourself, and the way they understand themselves is different than the way that you understand them. To come to terms with that, that's really, really hard, and that's the higher goal and vision of the work that we do in Roots. I say and I believe that the Dignity Center is holy ground. I deeply believe that. Furthermore, I feel that Merkaz Karama is something like a mental health clinic. Because I think that most Israelis, certainly the ones that we come in contact in the work of Roots, and most Palestinians are sick in the heart, with a disease that has lots of different symptoms. This disease, one of the ways I refer to it, is the hubris of exclusivity. The hubris of exclusivity. It's a disease that infects us with the conviction that my people is real and yours is fake. We belong in the land and you don't belong in the land. It's ours and it's not yours. And in the work of Roots, after the level of humanization, We meet the human being in the fullness of his or her national identity and come to terms with that, a process of healing from the hubris of exclusivity begins. It's a long process. It's not always successful, but it's a holy process. So we're going to show now a video from the first year and a half of our work, the beginning of the building of our center. You'll see there Ali Abu Awad, who became the Palestinian founder of Roots.
So starting with the first video? Yep. Okay.
גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין,
And we're not at the beginning. But besides that, we're in good shape. Sorry. Now we'll see. No? I was showing you a minute ago.
This is your second screen. You have to slide it to the second screen. It looks like it's your second. You're using a mirrored screen. So all you do is slide the thing over to it. So if you go down,
You want to take it?
where's your video?
Multiple displays.
Where's your video? So just take the browser and slide it to your second screen. Slide it all the way to the right. There.
Ah.
مرحبا اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت أمار فلسطين.
שלום, אני הדסה פרומן מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה.
My name is Nadine. I am from Bethlehem.
Shalom, my name is Shaul. I live in Tekoa.
Hi, I'm Bill.
Take it from here. Slide it from the top all the way across. Yeah. Now maximum. Do your maximum thing in the corner.
Okay.
You're up here. And this is the second screen.
Okay. Got it.
مرحبا اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت أمار فلسطين.
שלום, אני הדסה פרומן מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה.
My name is Nadine. I am from Bethlehem.
Yeah. But just let's forget it. It's okay.
Okay, go ahead, and if we get it up, we'll get it up.
But I can't talk while you're doing that because it just distracts the people.
Okay.
I know from experience. Shut it off. Okay, we'll just. Do we want the lights?
Yes.
9 years ago, I'm driving my car in the area where I live. I live in a lone shvut south of Jerusalem, and I had in the car 2 Protestant pastors from the US, evangelicals. They had come to the Holy Land to see how the visions of the biblical prophets that are common to Jews and Christians are coming true before our eyes, how the daughters and sons of the land are returning. And with great pride, I drove them around to show them the roads we paved and the trees we planted and the settlements we've constructed. We went to Alon Shvut and to Rosh Tzorim, to Bat Ayin, to Kibbutz Kfar Etzion. And as we're driving, I picked up a hitchhiker. We continue driving, and I picked up another hitchhiker. After a few minutes, these 2 young men asked to leave the car. I stopped, they got out. We began to drive again. One of the pastors, he was from Texas, he said to me the following. He said, Hanan, you just taught us a lesson in Jewish ethics. You picked up hitchhikers. No one does that in Texas. So I said to him, Bob, it's not just me. Around here, we all pick up hitchhikers. We have a common vision. We trust each other. And just like everyone else, I do my best to pick up every person who puts out his finger for a ride. And by the time I finished that sentence, it dawned on me that I was lying. I was lying to the 2 pastors. Even worse, I was lying to myself. I believed that I pick up every person. Not true. What I should have said is I pick up every Jew. I realized at that moment that I don't see the Palestinians. They're 85% of the population, approximately. They're walking on the same roads that the Jews walk on. But for me, they didn't exist. They weren't human beings, or they weren't significant human beings. And I realized that I was just blind. That I lived in my world, in my story, in my bubble, my Jewish story, my Zionist story, my return to the land story. And I did not know, I did not see that there's any other people, any other story in the land. I'd never met a Palestinian. They were like the gray drab scenery that passes in the background of the movie, my movie, but they're not part of the plot. So the pastors and I are talking, and I really begin to feel that there's something wrong with me. I have to find a way to turn the Palestinians into human beings in my eyes. What I'm going to do is, I said to these 2 pastors, I'm going to meet them. I'm going to meet the Palestinians and turn them into significant players in my heart and my mind. I began a journey to meet Palestinians. It took a week, it took a month, it took a few months, and I was stymied. I did not immediately succeed. You see, I live in a lone shvut, as I said, 3,000 Jews. A 5-minute walk from my front door is a Palestinian hamlet by the name of Kherbat Zakaria. There are 600 people there. At that point, 9 years ago, I had never, ever been there. I did not know anyone who'd been there. I didn't know anyone who lived there, and I was afraid to go in. How am I going to meet my neighbors? And eventually it happened over Facebook. People knew from things I'd said that I wanted to meet Palestinians. I got a message from a Protestant pastor, a different Protestant pastor, who lives not far from here right now, from Western Virginia. And he wrote to me, by the way, his name is John Moyle. So John wrote to me, he said, Hanan, I heard you want to meet Palestinians, I can help you. He said he has a Christian ministry, that he comes to the Holy Land, specifically to Judea, south of Jerusalem, where I live, twice a year. He meets Israelis, meets Palestinians, and he introduces them to each other. And at this point, January 2014, John already been 4 times in the Holy Land. He met enough people to bring them all together. And he told me when and where to go. It's now the last Wednesday of January 2014. I'm supposed to go this afternoon. I'm sitting in my living room. I get up and walk towards the front door. I open the door. I put one foot out of the house. My wife calls behind me, "Where are you going?" So I said, "I'm going to meet Palestinians." And that's when all hell broke loose. So she starts to scream, "What do you mean, meet Palestinians? They'll kill you." I came back in, and I approached my wife. I saw the terror in her eyes. She begged me not to go. I knew I had to do this. I walked out. As I closed the door behind me, I had a sense that perhaps she's right. Perhaps they will kill me. I walked through the fields around my house. I didn't take the car. It's supposed to be a 20-minute walk. My heart is pounding. I'm really afraid. And I find myself walking into a Palestinian farmstead, surrounded by a stone wall. There's a metal gate at the entrance. I walk in. I don't see too many trees. I don't see any structures. But I saw something I'd never, ever seen before. I saw 15 Israelis, some of them my neighbors, and 15 Palestinians doing the strangest thing. They were talking to each other. There's 2 over here and 3 over here, 4 over here. They're in little groups. I saw a Palestinian woman dressed in head to toe from brown. She's clearly an observant Muslim, alone, not talking to anyone. I walked right up to her, and I said, "Hello," in English. She said hello back to me. We talked about a minute. And then I said to her, "I can't believe that I'm talking to you." And she responded, "I can't believe I'm talking to you because we don't talk to Israeli settlers." A split second of silence, we kept talking. Not for a long time, her son comes over. She tells me his name is Yazin and he's 17 years old. So Yazin and I shake hands, and I see that he's wearing a windbreaker. And on the jacket are 3 words in English. And the 3 words were seeds of peace. You know what seeds of peace is? A show of hands, people who know what seeds of peace is? That's a lot of people, wow. Looks like I'm preaching to the choir today. But I had no idea what seeds of peace is. I said to myself, he's a Palestinian. His jacket says peace. This cannot be. Perhaps he doesn't really know what it means. I asked him half jokingly, "Yazin, what's this seeds of peace thing?" And instead of saying, "I don't know, someone gave me this jacket," he said it's the name of a summer camp in Maine, USA. And it takes Israeli kids and Palestinian kids out of the conflict zone for a summer of recreation and reconciliation. He said he just spent the past summer in the camp. He had a great time, met Israeli kids, they're friends on Facebook. And he told me he was so affected, so changed by meeting Israelis his age, that now he wants to spend some of his life building bridges of peace between our 2 peoples. And I remember looking at Yazin and listening and not knowing if I can believe what he's saying, because it contradicts everything that I know to be true. Palestinians don't talk about peace. They don't go to peace camps. They're all dangerous. And you might say that Yazin and his mother were the first 2 Palestinians that began the process of unsettling me. His father walks over. Jamal's a stocky guy. We shake hands. He's swarthy. And he looks to me really, really Palestinian, which means he looks to me really, really dangerous. He says, "Where are you from, Hanan?" I said, "I'm from Alon Shvut." "Where are you from, Jamal?" "Beit Umar." He said those 2 words, Beit Umar, and I had half of a heart attack. Because I know Beit Umar, it's a Palestinian city, 22,000 Palestinians. It's down the road from where I live, about a 10-minute drive south. And I passed by Beit Umar on the road to Marat Machpelah, to the Cave of the Patriarchs, hundreds of times, perhaps thousands of times. My car was stoned there once with my wife and kids in the car. The car is rocking and the windshield is breaking. Everyone is screaming. I know the people. Another time I was ambushed in the middle of the night. And I also have a friend who was gunned down there and killed, coming home from work at Hadassah Hospital late at night. So I know the people in Beit Umar, and it's really, really challenging to talk to Jamal. Jamal tells me, "Hanan, there's no Jews in Beit Umar. It's only us Palestinians. But there are the Jewish soldiers that guard the entrance to the city, and they make life miserable for us, so we hate them. They're the only Jews we know, so by extension we hate all the Jews. No one in Beit Umar would ever want to meet a Jew socially." But he said that he had this friend from the city of Jericho, and the friend invited him, a Palestinian, to come to a peace group of Palestinians and Israelis that meets in Jericho. And Jamal told me, "I told my friend, I'll never ever come with you. That's only for the weak people and the traitors." But the friend wouldn't get off his back, kept trying to convince him, and eventually Jamal tagged along. And he said they sat in a big room, 15 and 15, approximately Jews and Palestinians. They talked, and Jamal said, I didn't really participate. I sat in the corner, I listened a bit. And at one point, one of the Israeli Jews got up out of his chair and looked at me, Jamal said. And I got really uptight what would happen. He started walking towards me. I was really afraid. He came right up to me and forced me to shake his hand. And then he asked me questions. I had to answer the question. We had a really uncomfortable conversation. And when he finally walked away, Jamal said, I wiped the sweat off my brow and I ran to the bathroom to wash the filth off my hand from touching a Jew. And I vowed never to come back to this cursed place. And Jamal went home and told his wife about the terrible experience he had there. She agreed it was a big mistake to have gone. And of course, never go back and never tell anyone in Beit Umar that he was there. But Jamal's friend said, you had a nice time there, right? Come back. Jamal said, no, yes. Eventually, somehow it happened that Jamal went back with his wife. And then a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And Jamal tells me that they became part of this group. Hanani said, I found in place of an enemy a human being who turned out to be a partner, and that changed me. Jamal told me another story. He said, Hanan, there's lots of little kids in Beit Umar, 5 years old, 7 years old. You know that when they see someone who looks like you, they start to cry. I said, why do they start to cry? He did not understand why I don't understand. He got actually flustered. He thought I was trying to, act wise with him. And he finally said, it's the kippah you have on your head. And it's the beard, and so things hang from your pants because so many people who look like you, they walk into Beit Umar with their submachine guns and they kill the kids. So I thought that was borderline anti-Semitism. What I have to do is tell him off, and I'm getting more and more angry. I'm looking at him. What am I going to say to him? And then I realized that this is a moment of blessing. Because for the first time in my life, I'm experiencing how the other experiences me. What I have to do is not tell him off, it's to try and hold what I'm experiencing. Try and process it. So now I'm not going to tell him off, but what do I say to him? So I'm thinking, and I have a vision of my family, my 2 grown sons and my son-in-law and their kids taking a walk in the fields, and I see that the 3 young men, like all the other young men where I come from, are carrying pistols. And it suddenly dawns on me that those guns must be very, very frightening to little Palestinian kids. I said to Jamal, what do you want? We carry guns because we're afraid of you. And he said, no, you're not afraid of us. It can't be because we're afraid of you. I heard the words that he said. I really could not process it. Why are they afraid of us? We're peace-loving people. There's nothing to be afraid of. And I'm getting more and more confused and challenged by talking to Jamal. Later we sat in a circle, 15 Israelis and 15 Palestinians. The sun's going down, and Ali Abu Awad, the convener, together with the Protestant pastor of this get-together and the owner of the land that we are convening on, Ali Abu Awad got up to talk in perfect Hebrew that it turns out later he learned in Israeli jail. He said, my name is Ali Abu Awad. I'm from a proud Palestinian family. Thank you for coming here today. We lived for generations in Kubeba, and I said to myself, what's Kubeba? Never heard of it. He said, in 1948, the Jews forced us out, and we came here to the West Bank, and since then, the Jews turned Kubeba into Lachish, and I said to myself, Lachish, I know where that is. We've been living in Beit Umar in the West Bank, he said, since 48, and in 1967, the Jews came again, and since then, we find ourselves living under the rigors and the suffering of the Israeli occupation. Israeli occupation, he said. Never in my life had I heard a human being use those 2 words in my presence. I'd read in the newspaper, heard on the radio, but I really had no idea that there was such a thing, because when I drive on the roads of Samaria, when I walk in the fields of Judea, I don't see occupation. I see the return of the Jewish people to our ancient homeland after 2,000 years of exile. What could be more stupendous than that, more righteous than that? And I hear from Ali Abu Awad now that our Jewish triumph of the spirit in 1948 is his nation's tragedy. and our nation's righteousness, his nation's suffering. He starts talking about occupation and about people being killed and about the first intifada. His mother, he said, was a non-violent activist giving out leaflets and organizing strikes. He said he was involved in that as well. The Israeli army, he said, came into his house in the middle of the night and beat up his mother. Once, twice, 3 times, took her to jail for 6 years, and he said he was sentenced to 10 years in Israeli jail and never told the charges against him because it was a secret file. And I'm getting more and more angry listening. I want to get up and say, Ali, you're a liar, this can't be. I did not get up and say he's a liar because he wasn't trying to convince us of anything. He was just telling the story of his life very, very calmly. And I went home that day challenged and upset and angry and confused. I remember trying to figure this out. They talked about Palestine. Where's Palestine? I live in Israel. I'm getting nauseous. I'm pacing back and forth in my study, and I feel like I have to pick up my stomach and put it back in because everything is churning inside. I went back to that same place that I first met Ali and Jamal and the others, and they were there, and other Israelis began talking to them, and I joined in, and we were 3 and 3, we were 5 and 5, we were 10 Israelis and 10 Palestinians, then we became 15 and 15, and we sat and talked for week upon week, that became month upon month, that became year upon year, to the wee hours of the night, at least once a week. And what we really did is tell stories and listen to stories. The Palestinians told us the story of who they are, and we Israelis told them the story of who we are. And I have to tell you that when a Palestinian tells an Israeli Jew like me that he is struggling nonviolently for the liberation of Palestine, that's like a dagger to my heart. Really hard to listen. And when a Jew like me from New York tells Ali Abouad and Jamal Mukbel that I've come home to the land of Israel after 2,000 years of exile, that's like a dagger to their heart. It's really hard to listen. But we listened. We listened till it hurt. We listened some more. Sometimes we felt that we wanted to run away. We can't listen anymore to this nonsense. Sometimes you want to get up and scream and tell them off. Then it can't be true what you're saying. And so many times you feel you're a traitor for listening one more moment. But we listened. And over the course of months, we realized that there was something new that was being created in our deep dialogue. We founded Roots, Shorashim, Judar, the Israeli-Palestinian grassroots initiative for understanding nonviolence and transformation. And I want to try to share with you some of the very difficult insights that began to dawn on us during these difficult conversations. Ali Abouad said pretty much off the bat that it's true that most Palestinians go to sleep at night dreaming that the Jews will disappear tomorrow. Because the Palestinians know that the Jews don't belong. They're foreign colonialists like the French in Algeria. And if the Palestinians hold on long enough and fight back, the Jews will leave. They'll get the message they don't belong. It's too hard to stay. And we Israeli Jews, upon hearing that, again and again and again, had to admit that in truth, we Jews, go to sleep at night with the same dream. Not that the Jews will disappear, but that the Palestinians will disappear because we know that they don't belong. It's our land and not theirs. They're from someplace else. The Palestinians told us, but we have no other place to go. And we Jews told them, we've been in exile 2,000 years, we now also have no other place to go. So what happens when you hear again and again and again from the other side that they're not leaving, and they hear from us that we're not leaving? You realize you've been basing your identity for years, for decades, upon a false illusion that will never take place. No one's going anywhere. We're both here to stay, and it fries your brain. It churns everything around when you realize we have to find a way to live together. Either kill each other or live in coexistence, but no one's going anywhere. And we also began to realize that both sides construct their identities upon the erasure of the other side's identity. And both sides think that they can tell the other side who they are. The Palestinians, they say about Israelis, about Jews, Judaism nice. It's a good religion. The Quran greatly respects Judaism, but it's a religion. It's a faith. It's not a people, it's not a nation, you don't need land, so go back to Russia where you came from. Why did you come to colonize our land? And the Israelis look at the Palestinians and say, Palestinian? No, you know there's no such thing. It's a made-up identity. You're just Arabs. So go back to Saudi Arabia you came from. Why did you come to take our land? And after you listen and listen and listen to the other side's stories, you begin to realize you know nothing of who they are. You have to listen and let them tell who they are, and they may listen when you tell who you are. And it turns out we Jews learned that there's such a thing as the Palestinian people. That's why they consider themselves. And the Palestinians realize that there's such a thing as the Jewish people. That's what we understand ourselves to be. And we Jews began to see that the Palestinians are deeply connected to a land that they call Palestine. And the Palestinians began to hear that we Jews are deeply connected to a land that we call Israel. And now the most terrible thing, Palestine and Israel, historical Palestine and historical Israel have the exact same borders. What do you do when you realize that? It's not going to change. And I didn't talk now politics. This is history. This is identity. This is self-understanding. The same borders. And we began to fit two truths into one heart. That's the only way to fit two peoples into one land. You see, most of us, certainly in Israel, Palestine, and America as well, we think that if you're right, then I'm wrong. So I better spend all my energy proving that you're wrong so I can be right. But we began to learn that you don't have to be wrong for me to be right. We can both be right. There are two truths in that land, and I have to, and I hope that I am, opening up my heart to expand my identity. I'm a Jew, and I'm a Zionist, I'm a settled, I'm deeply connected to history and to the land of Israel and to the Jewish people, but I don't have to be connected in an exclusivist fashion. I can expand my identity to include the other side. I can begin to learn that there's more than one story in that land. There are two stories in the land. The Palestinians are not just the gray, drab scenery passing in the background of my story. They actually have their own story. And I have to find a way to live in two stories at the same time. One of them is mine, but I have to come to recognize the other story as well. That's the work of Roots. I'm going to conclude with 4 points. Point number 1, which I already hinted at. I didn't speak a word of politics. Why? Not because politics is unimportant. Politics is extremely important, and we in Roots believe, and I believe, that there is, in the present moment, a political configuration that is wrong. Israel is ruling militarily over the Palestinians who have no freedom and no rights and no citizenship and no dignity, and that's a tragedy for them and a tragedy for us Jews, and has to change. It's going to change through finding a solution politically of negotiations about borders and resources and refugees and security. So why didn't I talk about all that? Because we in Roots have come to the conclusion that the political conflict, as difficult as it is really only a symptom of a deeper conflict. And that's the conflict over identity. Who are they and who are we? Is there such a thing as the Palestinian people? Is there such a thing as the Jewish people? Number 2, is there such a thing as the land of Palestine? Is there such a thing as the land of Israel? And 3, do the Palestinians belong to Palestine and do the Jews belong to Israel? And until we give affirmative answers to all of those questions, till we recognize each side's identity, there's not going to be a full lasting peace. We may sign a treaty that'll last 5 years, 10 years, then it'll blow up in our faces. We signed Oslo 30 years ago almost, and in our understanding in Roots, Oslo exploded because it did not give recognition to each side's historical identity. It was a secular peace made among secular people who didn't have a full appreciation of the fullness of identity and connection to the land. That's point number 1. And what that means is that we have to work on the people-to-people recognition first, or concurrent with political negotiations. That's the work of Roots. Number 2, even though I just said that each side has to recognize other side's identity, that does not mean that we have to recognize the way the other side practices their identity. We distinguish between identity and its practice. At the same time that we validate our own identities and the other side's identity, we can and do criticize the way our people practice that identity, and we criticize the way the other side practices their identity. What do I mean? I mean that I support and I love Jewish settlement of the land of Israel, the whole land of Israel, but I do not support and I do not love Jewish settlement of the land that comes at the expense of the other side. That is unfair, that is unjust, that is unequal. And I'm able to recognize that the way we Jews are practicing our identity in settling the land is coming at the expense of the Palestinian people. And the Palestinians among us, in roots, are able to recognize that although the whole land is Palestine, that doesn't mean that we can and should condone violence and terrorism. Number 3, the work of Roots is exclusively in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria. It's in the heart of the conflict, the place the two sides are killing each other. But more than that, it's the place, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, where reside the people on both sides who are most strongly wedded to their historical identities. I mean the settlers, Orthodox Jews who look like me, right-wing Jews, deeply connected to history and to the land. And I mean Palestinians who are from refugee families, Palestinians who are former fighters who've spent time in Israeli jail, who've lost loved ones in the conflict, religious Muslims, people who you would think and are bearers of a particularist identity. Those are the two poles we're bringing to the conversation. Those are the people that have to talk. Those are the people that are not involved in Oslo and have to be brought into the peace process. And I don't mean now the political process, I mean the people-to-people recognition. And the last point is this, the last of 4 points, that in order to cherish and support the work of Roots, you don't have to support settlements. The work we do should be important to those who support settlements and to those who are against settlements. It should be important to the right and to the left. The two sides who are the poles in this conflict, the two sides who are killing each other, those are the extremists that have to talk. And that is the work of Roots. It doesn't mean supporting the extremists, it means supporting, bring them into the process so that all of us can benefit from the building of this human foundation of understanding and recognition that will lead us to a peace process that brings dignity and freedom, security and human rights to all in that little sliver of land that we both call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Good morning. Thank you for being here. So I'll share my story and I'll try to accomplish 2 things. A, why as a Palestinian I joined Roots, why I'm involved with this work. And before that, I'll try to just give a brief history of my life and also of the Palestinian narrative of how they look at the conflict. So I was born in 1994 in Gaza to a Palestinian family and to a refugee family. You perhaps know what Palestinian means, Palestinian people who are from historical Palestine. You know Gaza probably, but you perhaps don't know what does it mean to be a Palestinian refugee. Why are you a refugee yourself in your own country? The Palestinian narrative would say that people who were displaced from their own villages and homes and cities in 1948 have become refugees, and even their descendants have become refugees themselves as well. And I happen to be a descendant of a Palestinian refugees because my grandparents in 1948 were displaced during the what's called the War of Independence of Israel, or as we Palestinians called it, the Day of Nakba, the catastrophe, because when we remember 1948, we remember the catastrophe that happened to us. And you may ask yourself, why as a Palestinian you guys look at 1948 as a catastrophe? Like, why would you call it a catastrophe? Aren't you happy that the Jewish people finally have a Jewish state, a safe haven for them that can protect them and defend them? Don't you like the Jews? And the answer would be from the Palestinians, it's not about that. It has nothing to do with the Jewish people return to their state. We don't mind if the Jewish people have a state. Rather, our problem was that the consequences of the Jewish state establishment was the displacement of Palestinians like my grandparents. My grandparents in 1948 lost their land, lost their home, lost their society. Everything was destroyed in 1948. More than 500 villages was wiped off. People like my grandparents lived in Majdal before, a city today known as Ashkelon within Israel. They were forced to move to Gaza. They lost everything. So being born to this reality, to a family that are refugees, since your childhood you learn about life before 48. You learn about how much land we owned. You learn about how much our house used to be bigger, our social economical situation used to be better. And then what happened is that the Jews came, and then you are displaced from your home. When you hear all these stories, you grow up with sense of frustration, with sense of anger, and even with sense of hate to this unknown enemy called the Jews, or the colonizers, as I thought of them at that time. But it wasn't only abstract. It wasn't only history that made me more angry about the Jews, and it wasn't only abstract that made me really frustrated about this unknown enemy, but it was my first interaction with the Israelis. In Gaza, we don't really interact with the Israelis face to face, but at that time, my first interaction with the Israelis was 2002 when the Israeli Air Forces bombed Gaza. I was 7 years old, and I was terrified, and I remember that I was in my school, and I had to figure out how to get home by myself without the bus driver. I navigated my way. Somehow I got to home. My mom was terrified. She hugged me. She looked at me. She made sure I'm okay, and I looked at her, and I said, "Who in the hell is doing this?" And she looked at me, and she said, "The Jews are doing this." So I felt even more angry, and I felt even more frustrated. And the word the Jews in the Palestinian context is used to refer to the Israelis, and specifically to the Israeli army. Because remember, before 48, when the conflict was between the Israelis or at that time it was between the Arabs and the Jews. There were no such a thing as Israelis and Palestinians at that time. And this terminology is inherited both among the Jews. They refer to the Palestinians as the Arabs, and the Arabs refer to the Jews as to the Israelis as the Jews. So I even felt more frustrated. It seemed to me, from my understanding, that this is a continuation of what happened in 48. I was a child, I understood nothing but that they kicked my grandparents in 1948, and here they are against us in Gaza trying to kick me out from my home. That's how I understood it. That's what the bombing meant for me. I understood nothing about the context of that. But then life would continue in Gaza and would get harder for me as a child in Gaza, because Hamas would control Gaza in 2006. They win an election. 2007, there is a coup, and Hamas controls everything in Gaza. All of a sudden, the government becomes much more authoritarian. The government becomes much more Islamist and much more radical, and life starts becoming uncomfortable even for someone like me who was going to school in Gaza. And then the 2008 war happens, which is the first full-scale war between Hamas and Israel. Before that, we had Intifada, we had Air Force bombing Gaza, but it wasn't in the scale of what happened in 2008. I remember my first day of the war in 2008, I happened to be in school too, and it happened to be close to a police station that was targeted the first day of war in 2008. It was a graduation of the police department, and there were 200 members of the police in Gaza, and the Israeli Air Forces bombed them, and I've seen with my own eyes 200 people losing their lives. They were graduation, they lost their life. I'm getting out of school, I've seen the blood, I've seen the bodies. It was really, really, really horrible. And this was a moment where I felt that I no longer can live in Gaza. I just want nothing to do with this conflict. I want nothing to do with the life in Gaza. I don't want to live under Hamas authoritarian regime, under the siege and under this bombing. I always thought that when I grow up, I will pick up gun and fight against the Israelis and liberate Palestine, because that's the just thing to do. But at this moment, I realized that I am too weak to do it. I don't want to do it. I just want to have a normal life. I want to leave Gaza and just have go to school and college and have a normal life. But to say I'm going to move from Gaza, it's not an easy thing for a Palestinian. It's almost impossible at that time, after Hamas control, to get out of there, because you need an Israeli permit, or to get through Egypt, which is also difficult at that time. And the only two conditions to leave Gaza was you have to get a medical permit, and you have to be really sick. And by really sick, I mean you have almost cancer, so that they allow you to go to the West Bank or Israel. Or the other condition at that time, they would allow on Easter and Christmas for the Christian community of Gaza to leave, which makes about 2,000 people, now 1,000 people among the 2 million in Gaza. I happened to be born to a Christian family. We weren't practicing or anything, but we inherited this identity, and I was lucky enough to get what's so-called Easter permit. And I left. I was 15 years old, and I decided in my mind, I'm not going to go to Gaza whatsoever. Obviously, my family disagreed, whatever, but I did it. I moved to Ramallah, a city about 40 miles from Gaza, in the West Bank, and I said to myself, this is more liberal city, this is more open city. I will live here, work hard as hard as I can, get to high school, and just have a normal life. I want nothing to do with the conflict. I don't want to think of the Israelis or of Hamas or anything. And I did that for one day or for the second or for the third. I'm working as hard as I can. And then I realized that although I'm running away from the conflict and from the occupation and the conflict is chasing me. And I mean it literally chasing me, because 2 days after that, I would hear on the radio that the Israeli army decided that those who move from Gaza to the West Bank are considered illegal aliens. And thus, the Israeli army has the right to deport them back to the Gaza Strip. So I was even more furious that although I'm running away from all this conflict and all this messiness, it's literally chasing me. The implication of that meant literally I cannot move out of Ramallah city 5 miles away to any of the villages in Area C around me. So I found myself in a smaller prison than Gaza even, in the Ramallah city. But I worked as hard as I can. I focused on my high school. I didn't want to do anything about politics and worked hard, get through high school, then moved to college. And there I would have a new encounter with religion. I wasn't religious all my life. I always, was secular. For the first time, I was reconnected to my Christian roots. And through that time, I start asking questions about what does it mean to be a real religious person? What does it mean to follow the new teaching that I wanted to follow? And here I was challenged with something in the Bible that really challenged me when it comes to the conflict. It was in Matthew 5 and this teaching in the Bible that says, love your enemy. And I screamed when I heard this word. Because to me, and to Palestinians, the word enemy has one meaning. And it's the Israelis, these criminals, the colonizers who killed us, who colonized our land. And I screamed, how in the world can God ask me to do such a thing? It's impossible, I can't do it. But I said, well, I'm a good religious person, I'm Christian, I do love them. But you know what, I don't want to see them or talk to them. And guess what, I don't want them in this land, let them leave. But I love them at the same time. And I continued my life thinking this way, that I'm really being good as a person. But little did I know that at that time I went to a Department of Theology in Bethlehem, and I was studying theology, and I was studying ethics, and I was studying the kind of stuff religious people would study that were interesting me at that time. And little did I know that something in my ethical foundation, in my mind, is changing incrementally without noticing it. And then I would notice that in 2014, when another thing happened that really changed me radically, and I mean radically in the positive sense. In 2014, I would hear about the story where 3 Israeli teenagers, settlers, clearly religious Jews, were kidnapped and killed and murdered by Hamas. It was in the area of Gush Etzion where Rav Hanan lives. They were standing on the street trying to get a car, and a Hamas member picked them up and murdered them. And to me, it was a despicable act. It made me so angry, so frustrated. How in the world could a Palestinian do this? I was so mad. But at the same time, I wasn't shocked because it's Hamas, and I know Hamas does bad things. That's not shocking. But what shocked me more, the people around me were okay with it. And not only that, some people were even happy about it. And what shocked me even farther, that not only people outside, but even at the Department of Theology around me, people were okay with it. And when I asked why, they would say either because it's act of revenge, we are okay with it because the Israelis do bad things to us, or other people would claim that they were soldiers or whatever, although it was very clear they're not soldiers, they're not armed, and they're teenagers. So I was so annoyed, and I figured I had to do something. That I cannot allow for my people to be dehumanizing the other in this way and dehumanizing themselves at the same time, and I have to do something. So I figured that I will fix it. And how I will fix it? Through social media. I was young and new student of theology, and I said, I will write an article in Arabic, publish it in social media to argue that this is unethical, you can't do this, and everyone would say amen and agree. And I did that, and I published the article, and rather was shocked. No one said amen, and no one agreed. Rather, I just got attacked. I was called traitor. Others called me Uncle Tom, and all sort of bad things. And I was really shocked. But yet it revealed something to me at this moment. And it revealed to me how much the situation and the segregation and the injustice and the occupation and all of the horrible things we lived through had completely blinded us toward the humanity of the other. Has blinded us to the degree that we cannot feel sad, and we can't be okay with killing teenagers. And that was horrifying to me. And I figured I had to do something about it, but I didn't know what. But at this moment, one person sent me a Facebook message, and it was positive, and this person was the last person I would expect him to send me, someone I didn't know. It was an Israeli and a settler and a Jew. The sort of the worst three things you could tell me at that time. To be an Israeli is something, to be Jew is another, and a settler, they're the obstacles for peace. And I said, well, that's scary that he's texting me. And then he would ask that he would meet me. He said, what you wrote is inspiring, I would love to meet. And I said, whoa, that's a trap. This is a trap. He wants to get me there. The Israeli IDF would take me, send me back to Gaza. I know it. No, he would do this. Or the other thing that came to my mind, he wants to kill me. He'll bring me there and murder me, because that's how I experienced the Israelis in my mind. But something in me said, well, if you humanize these people, Khalil, you should go and meet him. Just take a step. And it wasn't easy, because I knew that I'm going somewhere where there's an IDF. I know I'm going somewhere where I could literally, even by mistake, be sent back to Gaza. But I dared to meet him. And I went to the area of Gush Etzion. It was near where roots would be established later. And I entered the room to meet this person. He was a civilian, clearly a religious Jew. I walked to the room, and it was my first time meeting an Israeli face-to-face that is not a soldier. And it was the first time that I'm meeting an Israeli Jew that is not carrying a gun. And we sat and we talked. And it was just shocking to me that we could do that. But what was more shocking to me, that I asked him two questions that I really wanted to know the answers to. The first question I asked him, do you really want to kill us all? And I really believed so. My experience and the experience of my grandparents and the Palestinians and the separation suggest to us that that's what all of them want. And he's like, no, of course not, that's ridiculous. I'm like, that's what I thought. And he asked me the same, do you want to kill us? I said, no, we don't want that. And this really shocked me more and further humanized him in my eyes. But the second thing, which was harder than the first, it was that I asked him, I want to ask you, why did you come from the beginning in 1948? Why are you in Palestine? And his answer started about all this history of biblical figures and the history of the Jewish people and things that I knew, that I read in the Bible, and I know their truth. But I never thought that this is the explanation. I never thought that these people feel anything toward these things. I rather always thought that it's out of greed, that the Western powers had placed the Jews there so they can use them for their Western imperial interest. I really thought all of these things, that these people, just like the French in Algeria or in Tunisia. And here's this person telling me all this story, and in a certain metaphysical terms, it was very romantically connected to the land in a very similar way to the Palestinian farmers. And only at this moment I realized that there is no way to move these people out of here. We have to coexist with each other. And that if you can't move the Palestinians out because we are so rooted in the land, so does these people see themselves rooted in the land. And I left this room determined that I have to do something. I have to change something about the situation. We still disagreed on politics, me and this person. And to be honest, it was hard that he was settler, although he was my first Israeli to meet. I left and I said I have to meet Israeli partner for peace. But I also said to myself, but it cannot be the settlers. Although I met my first Israeli as a settler. I left and I said I would not talk to the settlers again. Because politically, I think it was hard for me. And I went on my own journey. I worked with Israelis. I worked with Israelis, mainly the Tel Avivian and people in Jerusalem who I thought make more sense to me in their approach to things. And for a while I did that. And then 2018 I met Hanan. We followed each other on Facebook for a while, but we never really met. And I went to Merkaz Karama. And there I saw something inspiring in Merkaz Karama. The first thing that is good from my perspective was that you could get to Merkaz Karama without needing an Israeli permit to enter Israel. You could just drive as a Palestinian and get there. And I saw a certain level of equality there, although we are still unequal under the law, because in the Israeli military law, the Palestinians literally are not equal to the Israelis. You get there, and I've seen Khalid, who is the Palestinian director, and Shaul, who is the Israeli director, and this was inspiring. Only to see two directors that are equal in terms of authority was inspiring to me, that here is an example of what things could be. And I sat and I talked and I heard about their activities, and it was encouraging. And then Hanan told me, would you start another chapter with us in the north? At that time I lived in Ramallah, closer to the north than to the south where they are. And we did start this chapter between Nablus and Ariel. And I will end with telling you a story of how the first time I went to this meeting of the chapter and what does it mean for Palestinians to go and why we continue to do this work. It was that day, we're driving at night to meet Israeli settlers at the north for the first time, and it's me and my friend Ihab in the car, and we're driving there, and on this road between Ramallah and Nablus, I remembered something that happened a few weeks before I'm driving there. It was a few weeks ago that a Palestinian Muslim woman, pregnant woman actually, was driving in this road, and then it was targeted with Israeli settlers with stone, and she was stoned to death as she was driving in her car. And I was terrified and I was scared and I felt disgusted because on the one hand, I knew that this could happen on the way because the settlers on the north tend to be much more radical and extremist toward the Palestinians and do attack us. And I experienced a lot of attacks myself. And it scared me. But the second thing that scared me even more, that I know the settlements in the north are a small community. And I knew that it could be that one of the people we're meeting today has some connection to these people or know them at least. And I told my friend Ihab this, and it terrified us. And when we arrived there, I pulled out Rab Hanan. I told him, listen, I thought of that. I remembered that. I don't think I'm ready to meet these people. This is like different. These people are in the north. They're radicals. Or maybe they know someone who is, and I don't feel ready to do it. And Hanan responded by, let's sit, and you tell your story. And what did you experience here? And then the settlers would tell their stories. And when I told my story and I explained all these things, there were this young woman, settler, Yael. She looked at me and she clearly had tears in her eyes and she felt bad that this happened. And this encouraged me. But what was further revealing to me, that she didn't even know that these things happened. In her conscious and in her media, it seems like, and in their community, don't even see what it's really happening to the Palestinians. And this was shocking to me. And only at this moment I realized that not only are we trying to humanize the other, but when we're meeting with the other, we are also opening their eyes to the reality of what's happening around them because it seemed like they don't even see it. And this was really encouraging to me. But I will end with that. Despite all the important work that we're doing, and I believe it's very important work, and as Hanan described it, it's a holy work. I do believe it's a holy work. If you can transform one person, if I can open the eyes of one settler to see me as a human, I think that's a success. And if it's the other way around, if I help one Palestinian to see the Israelis as human, this would be a success for me. But this is not enough. As Hanan said, we need a political settlement, and I would argue that both sides are, to a certain extent, are suffering from the conflict that we have today. But I would argue that we, the Palestinians, are suffering the most because we are the people who are living under military occupation. We are the people who are being literally suffocated daily. I am not equal to Hanan. I can't go and travel whenever I want. Rather, I need Israeli permits. I need to cross through checkpoints, etc. So the situation needs to be solved politically. But I would argue the work of roots is important, whether we want political solution to come through it, like let's say through masses that would be transformed and lead to a political solution, which is quite possible, or whether political solution come by itself in the form of two states or one state or whatever this is. Because the work of recognition and the work of reconciliation is still needed even after political settlement. And we have an example here in the US. After the Jim Crow era is over and all these things, I believe that still there is need to address all this history and all these inequalities between the two people and recognition of the mistakes that was done toward the others. With that, I would end, and I think, Hanan, you have something in video or something? Yeah. Oh, a film, yeah. Thank you for listening.
film. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is wonderful work. What do you see as the end game? I mean, we talk about a two-state solution, a one-state solution. What makes sense when people recognize each other's value and rights? What's the end game that happens?
One of the many, many, many activities that we have at Roots is a monthly lecture series that relates to the question that was just asked. We have representatives of different political movements from Israel and from Palestine coming to Roots, to our Dignity Center, to present their visions for the future. I'll tell you 5 different initiatives that have spoken so far. There's an Israeli movement called Anachnu, which means we, and they have a very, very clear explanation of why the traditional two-state solution is the best solution. We heard them speak, and we had a discussion. We also have heard from 2 different representatives of a one-state solution. We heard from Jonathan Kutab, who's a Palestinian human rights lawyer, who happens to live in Jerusalem and here in your area. He goes back and forth. He just wrote a book about his version of the one-state solution. He spoke, and we listened and discussed. Another time we had a representative of the Abrahamic movement, which presents a vision of a one-state divided into cantons, something like a federation like the United States. We also have had a representative from the movement that's called A Land for All, who present a vision of 2 sovereign states that are connected by a confederation, like the European Union. This last approach of the confederation is one I personally am in favor of, and I'm a member of that political movement, and many of the activists in Roots also are. Khalil has a different vision.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's my opinion, not Roots, but I don't know if I have vision anymore. Yeah, I mean, as the situation gets harder, like you lose vision politically, right? Or you lose like hope on like what's possible or not. But I mean, like I always believe 2 states is the easiest to fulfill because it's as much as big of a compromise it is. Even if like let's assume in a 2 states you have to move all the settlers, which is not discussed because they want to swap land. But let's assume that. I still believe that's a much easier compromise on the Israelis to do than to transform the entire state of Israel to post-Zionist state, let's say, in a one-state reality, right? So it's either one state or two states, from my opinion. Then it comes what's so-called confederation. In a confederation, they would argue that there is 2 states that are connected in confederal sense, right? But what 2 states? There are no 2 states to connect them, right? And in a 2 states, all the settlers would stay, all the Palestinians would stay, whatever. But the settlers are on state land. They're on Palestinian state land. So I don't envision like what is a confederation between completely 2 equal sides, which 2 states to like 2 states or confederation, to me it seems that just normalizing the status quo, but giving it a confederation name, but it has really no sense in it, because literally the settlements are in Palestinian state land, and I don't see any way to move from that. So it's to me either 1 state or 2 states. I would pick 2 states and over 1 state because it's easier to accomplish.
We're going to show the video.
I think we are ready.
I'll just add that whatever the solution is, we believe that the people-to-people work of recognizing the other side is the foundation and the vehicle to get there. So this is a video from the first year of Roots. If it works. It's a trailer of a movie that appeared on Israeli television about the first year of our work.
אנחנו נמצאים כאן באדמה של המשפחה שלי. כשבאתי לכאן והחלטתי להקים מרכז פלסטיני שלי אלימות, אני מצפה שיתקפו אותי גם בחברה שלי וגם באוכלוסייה של המתנחלים. אבל אני יודע, כל עוד שאנחנו לא מדברים עם הימין, השמאל לא יעשה שלום.
The first time I had heard someone talk about being in Israeli jail, someone talking about suffering under occupation.
וזה שאני מכבד אותך, זה הכבוד שאני מכבד את עצמי כשאני מסתכל על עצמי בראי.
We believe that religion has to be part of the solution.
Allahu Akbar. Adonai hu Elohim.
יהודים ניצודים בארץ ישראל כמו חיות, ממש. פשוט צדים אותם. צדים אותם. רואים רכב, איפה הם? איפה השותף? איפה האח?
אתה יושב על הכלכלה שלי, אתה יושב על הבית שלי, אתה יושב על הלב שלי, אבל לא כשותף.
האם אתה מוכן להודות שהישיבה שלך פה היא ישיבה של פשע? וממילא תגיד לי מבחינה פוליטית.
The Jewish people, that we own this land? We don't own this land. We belong to this land. And the Palestinian people also belong to this land.
אנחנו האחרונים בעולם שצריך לשבת אחד עם השני. באתי לבקש לדרוש איתם מחברי. מפני שאת ואני סבלנו שלא חיפשנו את זה לפני. مرحبا اسمي خالد أبو عواد من قرية بيت أمار فلسطين.
שלום, אני הדסה פרומן מתקוע, אשתו של הרב מנחם פרומן, זיכרונו לברכה.
My name is Nadine, I am from Bethlehem.
Shalom, my name is Shaul, I live in Tikvat.
Hi, I'm Bilal, I'm from Beit Umar.
My name is Rabbi Hanan Schlesinger, and I live in Alon-Shvut.
4 years ago